Welcome to part 2 of everything I hate about the trucking industry. I'm going to be building the monorail train station at Newark International Airport as I talk about a few more things I hate about the trucking industry. In this video, we're going to talk about how mistakes aren't forgiven, you're treated like an idiot for not already knowing something. I hate fleet managers, by the way. We'll talk about how companies just treat you like a number. We'll talk about false accusations, threats, other ways the training videos lie to you, the horrible turnover rate of most trucking companies, and dealing with the police. Another problem I have with the trucking industry is how mistakes are not forgiven. One highly illogical thing about the trucking industry is how they refuse to train you properly, then get mad at you when you get out on your own and make a mistake. In most of my previous jobs, if you make a mistake, you can tell the manager and then they'll help you correct it and tell you how to prevent it in the future. I can even use my current job as an example. On my first day as a school bus driver, I accidentally picked up a student that was going to a different school. When explaining this mistake to my manager, they said, for future reference, until you recognize everyone's faces, ask them which school they're going to. I didn't know back then that the same stop was used for multiple routes. But I was scared to death to tell anyone I made a mistake in the trucking industry, because it's straight up not forgiven. Trucking companies are like those anime characters that are like, I'll never forgive you for what you did. Sometimes making one mistake is all it takes to lose your job. It don't even matter if it's your first time making the mistake. Even if you didn't know then how to prevent the mistake but know now how to prevent it in the future. They don't care, you'll get fired for it. So despite my trainer being asleep the whole time I was driving, I was expected not to make any mistakes, else I'd risk facing unemployment. Now for number 8, you're treated like an idiot for not knowing stuff. Looks like it's time for another example. One day when driving in upstate New York, for whatever reason the windshield washer stopped working. I called the company to report it. Their response was, well, why didn't you just throw snow on the windshield, you idiot? Also, what if there weren't no snow on the ground? That's literally how the higher-ups talk to you. What are they talking about, I wondered? Is throwing snow on your windshield a thing in New York? I've never heard of this. That doesn't even make sense. How would that even work? I don't know what they expected that to do considering it was too cold to melt the snow. Even so, water is not soap. How was I supposed to wash the windshield without any soap? Haven't you guys washed the magic school bus or even been to health class in school? All joking aside, I haven't the slightest clue how I was to come up with something so outrageous. I replied to them, okay, but that still needs to be fixed, right? Their response was, well, it's probably just frozen. Shocked by how this conversation is going, I'm thinking, excuse me? I live in Pennsylvania and it gets really cold here in the winter as well, but never cold enough to freeze windshield washer fluid. So excuse me for not knowing that could even happen. I know everything liquid has a freezing point, I just didn't know it was that high for windshield washer fluid. Also, commercial driving companies choose the worst washer fluid, the kind that freezes. You'd think a company that operates where it can get down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit would use extra strength washer fluid, but what do I know? Forgive me for not knowing how fluids behave in places I've never driven in. If I talked about every time I was called an idiot in the trucking industry, we'd be here all day, but here's another example. The truck was missing a mud flap. Also, why is it even possible to run over your mud flaps while reversing? I called the company to report the damage. They told me it was fine, to which I protested, well, I ain't trying to get no ticket. Their response was this, a truck without a mud flap is legal as long as it's attached to a trailer that isn't missing any. You as a commercial driver should know that. Of course I was thinking, and how was I supposed to know this? I've had 3 trainers and not one of them mentioned, by the way, if your truck's missing a mud flap but your trailer isn't, you can legally drive. No one in the truck driving school told me this either. The truck driving school told me if there's any damage, don't drive it. And well, I think most people will refer to a missing mud flap as damage in their books. So how was I supposed to already know that? You tell me. In the trucking industry, you're expected to just know how to do stuff without having ever been taught by a trainer or literally anyone else. And if you don't already know it, then I guess you're just an idiot. By this company's logic, what's that? You don't know how to replace an alternator? Well then, you're an idiot. That's how I was treated in the trucking industry. The whole time I was in that industry, I was constantly ridiculed for being a rookie driver and not knowing how to do stuff no one taught me how to do. Another issue I had was no one taught me how to unsecure or resecure the load. When I got to my first customer, I couldn't even unsecure the load. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to undo the load bar that was holding the packages in place. I used load straps when I loaded and unloaded trailers at FedEx, but we never used load bars. I couldn't figure out how to loosen or tighten it because no one showed me how. I could only find tutorials on how to tighten it online, but not how to loosen it. 3 trainers and not a single one of them taught me how to use a load bar. I feel for you if you're coming here from an office job. It was never immediately clear where to put the trailer when I got to a store. When I say this, people say, well, just use Google Earth. Which is funny because I used Google Earth before delivering to every single store. It helped most of the time, but you can't always zoom in far enough at parking lots to get subtle yet important information. I'll use an example of a Family Dollar that was next to a police station. There was an alley behind both buildings that was shared between them. It looked like I could pull in from either direction and stop when I get to the loading door. That's usually the case, but this alley was different. You couldn't go in from either direction because one side was for police cars only. Trucks couldn't use that entrance. I had to back into the alley from the other direction, which also turned out to be wrong. Google Earth didn't help me here because I couldn't zoom in far enough to read the police cars only sign posted on the fence. There's no way you could have seen that from the satellite. Google Earth helps in a lot of situations, but not in a lot of the areas I went to. By the way, when I was at a truck stop in New Jersey, someone stole my best roller off the back of the truck. By the way, when you pull away from a truck stop, make sure your trailer is still attached to you. Apparently there are people who would get under your trailer and unhook it while you're gone in an attempt to sabotage you. Let's say hypothetically, you pull away and get as far as the highway when the trailer is unhooked and causes a crash. You'd go to jail for that. What's really annoying is the person who sabotaged you wouldn't get in any trouble. Doesn't that sound a bit messed up? I get you should be responsible for inspecting the truck before you leave, but isn't it messed up that someone can waltz right over and sabotage you and not get in trouble? While I do believe you should share some of the blame for not inspecting the coupler, the saboteur should get the bulk of the punishment for doing it in the first place. From what I've been told, they ain't even interested in finding out who sabotaged you. Their reasoning is you were driving, so you're responsible. By the way, if you sabotaged a train, the FBI will be looking for you. This happened to a New Jersey Transit train in the 1980s. Speaking of sabotage, one truck driver told me that someone pulled into the space next to him at a truck stop and stole 8 brand new tires from the trailer, replacing them with their raggedy old tires. They ended up being responsible for the tires that were stolen. They had to replace them. But the person who stole the tires never got in trouble because it's only the driver's fault. You know, they call these monorails, but technically they run on 3 rails. There are 2 metal rails on the outsides of the beam. These provide electricity to power the train. They also provide support for the train. The train runs on comically small metal wheels hidden inside the undercarriage. They pick up the electric current and use it to propel the train forward. It's actually quite similar to how toy trains work, but on a much larger scale. Now we're going to talk about why I loathe fleet managers. My fleet manager complaints are mostly the same as my complaints about being treated like an idiot for not already knowing something, because it was mostly him that got angry at me anytime I asked a question. Additionally, he was always trying to set me up for failure, always taking advantage of me for being a rookie and constantly lying to me. Here's an example. My fleet manager said I was required to park the Family Dollar trailers across the street from my house. It's in our contract that you keep an eye on it, he said. I can't even begin to tell you everything that's wrong with that statement, but for starters, was I expected to sit on my porch and stand guard over the trailer for 2 days? That don't sound like no day off to me. It sounds like slave labor. Why not park it at a truck stop, I asked. It's in the contract, he said. You need to keep an eye on it. So if someone stole from the trailer, would they blame me for that? I said, but my trainer on the Dollar General account always parked in the truck stop on his time off, then came back to pick it up. He replied, what? He wasn't supposed to do that. Back then, I lived on Spring Garden Street between Locust and 7th Street in Easton, Pennsylvania. You cannot park a truck there. I tried to explain to him that even if there was enough room, people on that street are known for vandalizing your vehicle if you park in front of their house, but he wasn't buying it. Easton is not a truck-friendly place. There was no convincing him, though. He stubbornly held his position that it had to be in front of my house. I attempted it, but as expected, it was a no-go. I did, however, find an entire empty city block on nearby Wood Avenue. If you watch part 1, you'll probably guess that that is where I knocked down a city tree accidentally. When I brought the truck back, I told the fleet manager, I cannot park in Easton. There's not enough room. It is physically impossible. He said, why didn't you just take it to the storage lot in Bath, Pennsylvania? Ironically, this is close to where I currently live. Why didn't he mention the storage yard sooner? He said it had to go to Easton. Then, when I get in trouble, it's like, why didn't you go somewhere else? I don't know why, but fleet managers love to see rookie drivers get into trouble. Then they tell you of option B, but they don't hesitate to throw you under the bus first. If you try to report the fleet manager, he'd just lie and say, well, I never told him to do that. Fleet managers are the worst kind of people. Why would a fleet manager tell you to park a truck in a city, then tell you you could have parked it in a much larger lot after you hit a tree? Because they love to see rookies get in trouble. It's their sick, twisted version of entertainment. I'm living proof that you should never trust a fleet manager. They only want to get you in trouble. Fleet managers will never get in trouble, even if they knowingly tell you to do something illegal. If a fleet manager tells you something, ignore him. Fleet managers constantly ask you to do illegal or otherwise wrong things, but if you refuse, they'll try to punish you for it. More on that later. But if you agree and get in trouble, they'll lie and say they never told you to do it. In short, fleet managers are jerks. Also, if you're a truck driver, I'm curious what you think of my fleet manager's idea to throw snow on the windshield because the washers weren't working. I'm still puzzled by this even to this day. What would you think if you saw me doing that? If you look up reviews of most trucking companies, you'll find complaints about the fleet manager. It's not just me. They also complain that HR does nothing about it, but HR is useless no matter which company you work for, so that goes without saying. One baffling thing about the trucking industry is that they don't remember your name, unless they're firing you, of course. They only remember the truck you're assigned to. You might as well change your name to truck number 57691 or truck number 60023, cause that's all they'll know you by. Personally, I don't care. I didn't care enough about them to remember their names either, so I guess the feeling was mutual. I just think it's weird for a company not to know who's working for them. This has to be a security issue somehow. Could you imagine if bus companies never knew who was driving their buses? Again, I don't care that much, I just think it's weird. Don't even get me started on how often I was falsely accused of something. If I listed all of them, we'd literally be here all day. That said, here are a few examples. I picked up a trailer that had a tiny puncture in it. This was the same one I took to Easton. I didn't see the puncture because it was so tiny it was barely visible, especially at night when I did the pre-trip. When I brought it back, I was immediately blamed for it, even though it was already there and likely has been there for years. I told them it was already there, but when they have it set in their minds that you did it, anything you say falls on deaf ears. They added struck an overhead object to my driving record. To avoid this in the future, take out the pre-trip sheet, scribble out the whole trailer, and mark everything as dented, scratched, punctured, shredded, or any other negative words that come to mind. This is the only thing I can think of on how to avoid Family Dollar's obsession with blaming you for damage the trailer already had. Sometimes in trucking, lying is the best answer. Don't worry, the industry is literally built on lies. To be honest, they'll probably still try to find a way to pin it on you. On a separate day, I picked up a trailer that had a dent in it. I think you know where this is going at this point. On a separate day with the same trailer, I hit a tree branch. I say hit, but actually it scratched the trailer. They tried to say me hitting, really scraping, the tree branch caused the dent, but I know for a fact that the dent was there the night before. No matter what I said, they just didn't care. All it takes is an accusation to get stuff added to your record. They don't even have to prove it was you. They ain't interested in investigating who actually caused the dent. It's far more convenient just to blame you. When making a delivery to another Family Dollar, there were some severely damaged rollers outside of the store. Par for the course for Family Dollar, they tried to blame me for it, despite me being nowhere near them. Never go anywhere near damaged equipment, by the way. It makes it easier for them to blame it on you. The store manager's words, not mine. We need you to move a bit closer since you ran over our rollers. This garbage human being knew it wasn't me, but he was so used to lying, it just slipped out like a normal sentence. This is why I've come to hate every single grocery store manager. I swear, one of the qualifications to be a store manager must be that you have to be a terrible person. They don't care that their lies might permanently damage your record or make you unemployable. They love ruining truck drivers' lives. Every time I turned around, someone was always threatening me in the trucking industry. I can't tell you how many times a Family Dollar manager demanded me to move the trailer closer to the store. I would politely explain to them it wasn't safe because I might hit something if I get any closer. They would always threaten me by saying that if I didn't move any closer, they'd call my manager and try to get me fired. They'd also threaten they'd lie and say I was sleeping in the truck the whole time and didn't help unload. This is actually how I got my first incident. At a Family Dollar in Irvington, New Jersey, the manager threatened me that if I didn't get any closer, he'd complain to my manager that I was a bad driver and they should fire me. This being my first delivery, and me being terrified, not knowing how any of this works, and none of my 3 trainers teaching me how to deal with angry customers, I'm terrified of losing my job, so even though I didn't think it was safe, I attempted to get closer. Whenever I tell this story, people always say, well, it's your truck, why didn't you refuse or you didn't think it was safe? But how was I supposed to know I was allowed to say no to the customer when no one ever told me, especially in a society of the customer's always right? As you might have guessed, I backed into the store. This is also how I lost my job because apparently there was a company policy which no one ever told me about that said I was not to get closer than 5 feet of a store. But how was I to know this when no one ever told me? 3 trainers and not one of them mentioned this 5-foot rule ever. I got fired trying not to get fired. I got fired for breaking a rule no one told me about. If I had known of the 5-foot rule, I could have told the customer, sorry, company policy, we can't get any closer than 5 feet. Then if they threatened me, like that guy in Irvington, New Jersey, I would be confident that I was in the right, that I was following all the rules and wasn't going to get in any trouble. I was scared of being fired for not being able to do what the customer asked of me. Since I didn't know what the company policy was, I wasn't confident that I was in the right. Family Dollar managers like to take advantage of rookie drivers and threaten their jobs when they don't get their way. The trucking company can't be bothered to help you by telling you the company policy, so you're literally up the creek without a paddle, with no idea how to respond to angry customers. I've had different experiences as a school bus driver when something similar happened. This one parent kept complaining that I was arriving at their child's stop late. The schedule said 6:15, and that's the time I arrived, but every morning she'd complain to the company that I was late as usual. By the way, just because the bus doesn't arrive when you want it to doesn't mean it's late. She constantly kept threatening that she was going to try to have me fired if I didn't start arriving on time. She even went so far as to send a complaint to corporate. Her complaint stated that I was a terrible driver, was always late, and that they should fire me. In short, she was a lying witch. Can't say the other word or I'll get demonetized. My manager explained to me that this was serious as corporate saw the complaint and now wanted to know what was going on. I said, look, I've been arriving at the scheduled time. I don't know what else to tell you. They tried to convince me to switch to an easier route, but this one paid more. Plus, why should I run away if I know I'm in the right? It was different when I was a truck driver, since no one told me anything. I didn't know if I was in the right, but this time I knew I was following all the rules. They sent another driver out with me to watch me do the run. She also said I was arriving on time. Eventually, after much toil, the customer finally gave up. Legend has it that to this day she still thinks I arrived at her stop late. When making a delivery to a Family Dollar on Myrtle Street in New Britain, Connecticut, the owner of Pro Cleaners next door got mad at me for parking the truck in front of his store. I politely explained to him that the drop-off area is in the front, so sadly this is where I had to be to unload. I then said, the sooner you let me do this, the sooner I can leave and be out of your way. I'll try to be as quick as possible. This guy got so mad he parked his car in front of my truck to box me in. I said, if you don't move, I'm gonna call the police. This guy threatened me by saying that if I called the police on him, he was gonna lie and say I scratched his car. As mentioned earlier, all it takes is one false accusation to lose your job. It didn't help that I was already one incident away from being fired. I couldn't risk yet another false accusation on my head. I wasn't trying to lose my 2006 Nissan Altima I've worked so hard to get. I was stuck there all day until he finally decided to move his car. I try to be a reasonable person. Before threatening to call the police, I asked him, could you please move your car so I can leave? He laughed at me and said, ha, that's what you get for parking your truck in front of my store. The other workers at that dry cleaning store also laughed at me. They thought the fact I couldn't go anywhere was hilarious. I tell you what I think of those people, but then YouTube would demonetize me because those aren't very family-friendly words. I was so frustrated that when I was finally able to move, I drove to a truck stop and didn't drive for 2 days, for I was too angry. They say you should never drive when you're angry, and it took me 2 days to calm down. I hope he gets struck by lightning. Knowing people like that exist make me question if I ever want to drive trucks again. I don't think I've ever been as stressed as that day. This trash heap of a human being, trying really hard not to swear, threatened to lie to the police and say I scratched his car. Few things can make me angry enough to swear. This is one of those things. Later on, I happened to be driving through New Britain, Connecticut in my car, and those same feelings of anger and rage resurfaced the whole time I was in that godforsaken town. There ain't enough swear words in the English language to express my anger. In part 1, I mentioned lies told in the Family Dollar training video, but here's a lie the trucking company's training video told me. In that video, they said, everyone's skill level is different. If you don't feel comfortable where you are, call driver placement and they'll move you to another account. I'm living proof that that is nothing more than blatant misrepresentation of how their company actually works. Every single word in that quote was completely dishonest and did not contain even an ounce of truth in it. I asked them to remove me from the Family Dollar account, saying that I didn't think I was at a skill level where I could handle it. I did everything short of begging them to remove me from this account. At first they said they needed the fleet manager's permission first. Then, a month later, they changed their excuse to just, "We can't remove you from this account." So that phrase, "everyone's skill level is different," is nothing more than a distortion of facts. Now let's talk about the horrible turnover rate. You want to know why people are always leaving the trucking industry? It's because there is no shortage of truck drivers. I'll explain. It's simple, really. Step 1, remind someone their job is boring. Step 2, remind them it doesn't pay well. Step 3, promise $1,600 per week and a stable career. Step 4, place advertisements on billboards they'll see on the way to work. Step 5, don't train them how to do the job right. Step 6, fire them when they make a mistake. Step 7, repeat steps 1 through 6 to refill that position. It's not hard at all to convince someone to become a truck driver. Just promise a more stable career with a higher paycheck. I could even do it. I just have to lie through my teeth. That's my hypothesis for why they refused to remove me from the Family Dollar account. They probably thought, screw him. Let's just replace him with another rookie. We got like 500 of them. Truck drivers are a dime a dozen. They're expendable, about as replaceable as a dented nail. Now we're going to talk about dealing with the police. No comment on DOT because I got fired way before I'd even have a chance to have one encounter with them. I always try to give the police the benefit of the doubt because it's definitely a difficult job, probably more so than even truck driving. But I was pulled over once in a truck and that guy was very condescending, so those aren't particularly good odds. I've had some okay experiences not while being pulled over as well, which we'll cover in later parts, but the one bad experience has so many lessons to be learned in it. I got pulled over only once in New Jersey for driving on a Garden State Parkway. Hold up! Put out those flames and put down your pitchfork so I can explain something to you. I live in Pennsylvania. The closest thing we have to a parkway is a section of US 22 in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, namely Memorial Parkway, and trucks are allowed on it. When I tell this story, people always say, well, you should have known because it said Parkway. Then explain Memorial Parkway in Phillipsburg, New Jersey to me. If it's so straightforward, why can trucks drive on Memorial Parkway? Forgive me for not knowing that Parkway meant different things in different places. Let me take this time to remind you, 3 trainers, and not one of them mentioned trucks not being allowed on parkways. So, how was I supposed to know this? The closest equivalent I can think of is a section of US 209 beyond which trucks aren't allowed. Using it as an example, it's protected by several large white signs with bold black lettering, unmistakably intended for truck drivers. It says that trucks aren't allowed on US 209 beyond a certain exit. But what do they do for New Jersey's Garden State Parkway? First of all, let's throw common sense out the window. Step 1, remove the bold text. Step 2, remove the large white sign. Step 3, shrink the text until it's barely visible. Step 4, add a pedestrian sign that says no bicycles or pedestrians. Step 5, place the most important information on the bottom of the sign. Step 6, place the sign behind a bush so you can't read the bottom of the sign at night due to the headlights casting a shadow on the sign, masking the bottom. Follow these steps and you can easily scam truck drivers that aren't used to driving here. The sign read, Garden State Parkway, no bicycles or pedestrians, no trucks over 5 tons gross vehicle weight. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't see the portion that said no trucks over 5 tons gross vehicle weight. I only saw the portion above it which looked like it was intended for pedestrians. New Jersey has a problem with putting signs behind bushes, behind trees, and even behind buildings. The bush masks the most important part of the sign. I got pulled over almost as soon as I got on the highway, or should I say, parkway. The cop said, "You know you can't be here. This is the Garden State Parkway." I politely replied, "I apologize. I didn't know trucks weren't allowed on the parkway." He then says in the most condescending tone ever, "It's clearly marked, sir." If this is New Jersey's version of clearly marked, those city planners need to take a few lessons from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's signs with truck-specific information are large, white signs with bold black lettering. That's clearly marked, not New Jersey's lame example. What crazy person would put microscopic text on a sign and call it clearly marked? Where I live, there's a road called Township Line Road. Trucks aren't allowed on Township Line Road. At every intersection of Township Line Road, it has what you'd expect: a picture of a truck inside a red null set symbol. There's no way you could mistaken this for a sign intended for pedestrians. You might also see a white sign with bold black lettering reading "No Trucks." Ironically, no trucks signs exist everywhere except the Garden State Parkway. My eyes were scanning for such a sign, found none, then sent a message to my brain that said a scan was conducted and no errors were found. I always check for no trucks or weight limit signs when I'm in unfamiliar territory. I saw no truck sign that resembled anything I've seen in any other state. By the way, this was literally my first day driving in New Jersey. On that day, not only have I never driven a truck in New Jersey, I haven't even driven a car there, unless you count Phillipsburg, New Jersey, which brings me back to the Memorial Parkway example. So what? Are trucks allowed on some parkways but not others? How do you tell the difference? Forgive me for not knowing that there are whole highways trucks aren't allowed in an area I've never driven in. By this cop's logic, do I now have to stop at every single no parking sign in case one of them reads "No parking Tuesdays through Thursdays, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., April through August. By the way, no trucks over 5 tons gross vehicle weight." In literally every state I've driven in, no bicycles or pedestrians signs have never had truck-specific information on them. I don't know why New Jersey can't be bothered to just throw a regular no trucks sign before every Garden State Parkway entrance. This is exactly why I never drive in New Jersey. I don't want to have to put up with their BS. I always take a taxi or bus to the nearest train station and take the train from there. New Jersey is one of those BS states where a parking ticket can get your license suspended. Just take the train. You never have to be pulled over for BS reasons again. Oh, and never drive a truck in New Jersey. Well, we're out of time. That's all I have for part 2. In part 3, we're going to cover dealing with stress, how you're never home the times they say you'll be, dealing with Hire Right, the company that keeps track of your truck driving record, and by extension, keeps track of all the lies the company puts on your record that you have no say in, which we'll get to in that part. We'll also cover how difficult it is to get a job as a truck driver if you've been fired by another trucking company, falling behind on bills, and losing my car and the depression that comes with it. If we have time, we'll also cover how the punishment don't fit the crime. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.